There we go. So let me take attendance. Listen as I call your name, please. Today is October 6th. Natasha? Present. Pradeep Bain? Tanishka Cobra? Tanishka? Are we losing students? At some point I looked, yes, we are losing students. I wonder what's going on. I looked and we had about 8 participants. Now we're down to 4. Okay, let me wait on the attendance. I don't know what's going on. I think people may be having some challenges. Okay, so we're going to talk about, if you're following along on the syllabus, you'll see that our focus is on note-taking and better listening. Now, there's not necessarily a chapter in your text that deals specifically with this. You do have some communication strategies suggested in the text, and we've been reviewing that. So as I talk, I want you to jot down whatever you think is noteworthy in this lecture. And of course, I'm going to share a video to reinforce what we've discussed, and then there will be some further reinforcement exercises at the end of the lesson. Right? Note-taking is, in a nutshell, being able to communicate the essence of a communication. Sorry, let me mute that student's microphone. As soon as you join the meeting, make sure you mute your mic so that we don't get too much feedback. It is a powerful communication aid, and the emphasis or the goal in note-taking is so that we retain only the key points and that we convey only the key points. There are different approaches to note-taking and summarizing information depending on the kind of communication you're engaged in. So the different strategies if you're involved in verbal communication, the different strategies if you're reading written communication, and we're going to talk about all of those in our lecture tonight. But more focus is going to be placed on note-taking during verbal exchanges. So that involves summarizing what has been said in face-to-face conversation or over the phone or in any kind of group situation where there may be information exchange. So for instance, you may be at a meeting or attending a lecture. How do you take notes that capture the key points of that lecture or the essence of that communication? And then, as I said, we're going to discuss strategies to improve our listening skills, since listening is a key part of any communication exercise or communication act. I want to start, though, by talking to you about summary writing in general. And this is perhaps something that we learned when we first began high school. In your English classes, you may have completed summary writing exercises. So what does good note-taking and summary writing involve? And why are they important in business? Is a key question we need to ask. As I said, it's a way of concisely recording important information so that you can recall it later. No matter how good you think your memory is, you are going to need to take notes in certain situations. You need to remind yourself of what is said. And it is a mistake to think that when you go into a meeting or some other important talk that you will remember all the details of what has been said. You may remember the overall conversation or the overall topic. You may remember the gist of it, even some specific details, but you will not remember everything. And of course, the degree to which you take notes will depend on the level of importance you attach to the communication. If it's just a casual conversation, nothing that you will have to recall later, then of course you don't need to take notes. But when that conversation is tied to some action or step that you are expected to take, then it's a good idea to take out a pad, write notes, and try to get a general sense of what it is you're being asked to do, i.e. understand the essence of that communication before you take any action step. So why? Why is summary writing and note-taking important in business communication? how might those skills come into play or be relevant in business communication? Why is it important for us to be able to take the essence of a longer piece of writing and convey that? It's a skill that many people take for granted, but it is a very important skill. It's not something that many people know how to master. And you would have experienced this if you've ever been in conversation with someone that just seems to be droning on and on and on. I had the experience recently of my mother sending me a 5-minute voice note that she'd received from someone else. And I found myself saying, as I listened to it, get to the point. What is the point? And she forwarded it to me, of course, because she thought it was long-winded. And she herself was saying, get to the point. And then when the point of the message was revealed, we were both like, oh, okay, that was 5 minutes wasted. But why is it important for you to be able to summarize information in business? Let's see if I'm not hearing my students again. Yes, I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, I think it's important to summarize things in business because things could be let's say you have like you say 5 minutes twice. No, you miss the whole entire important point of the conversation.
And no one wants to listen to something unnecessarily. We are so overwhelmed with things to do that we need to be able to get to the crux of the matter. And we always say, and we say it so often, it's become a little bit cliche, but in business, time is money. So if you can communicate your ideas in a succinct and concise way, then you maintain your audience's attention, and the chances of misunderstanding or them drifting off in the middle of the communication are lessened. So it's important for you to be able to get your message across in a way that's both effective, but also concise, because what you're trying to do in any communication act is maintain your audience's attention. Once you lose their attention, then communication breaks down, right? But as important as it is, summarizing a longer piece of communication is not an easy task. You need to pay attention to the accuracy of your information, and you want to relay it in a way that's not boring, right, to your audience. So some good summary writing strategies, and I want you to jot these down as I go. First is scan the text first before you actually begin writing. Just look at the text overall. Look for things like headings and subheadings and key sections. Doing that will help you to get a feel for how the information is organized. And then if you're able to break it down into sections, you understand the author's flow. And sometimes just doing an overall scan of the document before you even read it will give you somewhat of an understanding of the purpose of this communication. And so when you go to reading with the purpose in mind or that overview in mind, then you are better prepared to understand what you're reading. All right, so that's first step. Just scan before you even begin reading. Scan the document and try to see how it's organized. Look for subheadings, and then you want to try to distinguish between minor and major details. So if a summary is a shortened version of the original, you only want to focus on the need to know information. So only communicate what you believe your audience needs to know. No room in a summary for minor details, for examples, for illustrations, for elaborations, only the crux of the information. And you'll see how this strategy works when I ask you to do the exercise later based on a listening activity that we will do. And then your job is to, while you're condensing the text, not misrepresent anything. So you need to be focused on getting the information right, not misrepresenting the author's intent or his idea, right? So all of those are important. And I'm going to repeat what I said. These important summary strategies. Scan the text first to get a feel for how it's organized. Try to distinguish between what's major or important and what are minor details. Eliminate those minor details or elaborations or examples. And then as you condense the text, be careful to avoid misrepresenting the author's ideas or intent. That should be familiar to you. Those strategies should be what you learned in high school in any class before this one, where there was an emphasis on writing and you may have learned summary. But what about when we have to listen to information, when we're in conversation and we need to get the main points of that verbal communication? We need to take action based on what we've heard, and we don't want to sound amateurish by asking every few minutes, can you repeat what you said? I'm sorry, let me just make sure I get this right. So what do you do then? Or what about a situation where you have to meet with a customer? Let's say you work in a customer service position and you're meeting with a customer to determine their needs, or the customer has a complaint, and then you need to relay information based on that exchange with the customer so that either you and your team can take action or you alone can take action to resolve the problem. That's where we need to be good listeners. Active as opposed to passive listening skills are very important in that scenario. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. How do we be better listeners? How do we communicate deliberately or listen deliberately so that the other person in communication with us feels heard and also understood? The irony about communication today is that we're saying a whole lot more, but we're listening to each other less. So there have been a lot of studies recently about how our attention spans have become shortened, how our tolerance for information is a whole lot shorter. And scholars are trying to determine where this comes from or what the shortened attention span is due to. Why do you think we are listening? First of all, do you agree that we are listening to each other less? A lot of people will say our world has not been more divided than it is today. Now, we're not necessarily engaged in armed conflict and wars to the extent that we were in the past, but there are so many divisions between people in terms of values and fundamental beliefs and ideologies that we're not listening to each other, we're not communicating effectively. Well, what do you think contributes to this breakdown in communication and the fact that we're not listening as much as we used to? What are some of the contributing factors to that problem?
I think a lot of it has to do with the different means of communication, i.e. Social media, what else? I think social media probably is one of the main things. And so you have information coming to you from every angle. And I think people are trying to keep up with all of the information that's coming to them. And so you no longer have conversations because you have all these different mediums that is distracting you from having face-to-face conversations. And so because you're having less of them, I think the art of listening then moves away a bit or diminishes.
Absolutely. Excellent, Janice. And that is it. That's one of the key points. It's what we call information overload. We are being inundated and overstimulated, inundated with information and overstimulated. So something happened this week, a thing happened. So Facebook crashed and WhatsApp crashed. And all of a sudden we were all like, wait, what? What is happening? And then I had a moment, I'll be honest, I had a moment of real panic when I thought WhatsApp was gone for good. And my friends were reacting, like I had friends sending me backups, like chat with me on this platform. WhatsApp is down, and there was all this speculation about whether it would be down for good, right? We have come to rely on these communication tools so much that we've lost the art of conversation. How many of you have been in a situation where it may be you involved or you've observed it? You've been at dinner in a restaurant somewhere and everyone at the table is in their device. Or you observe a couple on a date and he is in his phone and she is in her phone, and you think, well, what's the point of being on a date? How many of you have been in that situation?
All the time.
Oh, yes, yes,
I think we all have.
that's common.
It is
Yeah.
very common. It is very common. I have a 19-year-old sister. I kid you not. My sister will be sitting across from me at an event, a family function, and my phone will go off and I pick it up like, who's texting me? And it's her. Not to gossip, not to speak negatively about people at the event, because that's not something we encourage, but just to say something random. And I'm like, what is wrong with this child? Why don't you get up from wherever you are and have a conversation? But more even so than our generation, well, I don't know your ages in the class, but my generation, the generation after us, or several generations later, more and more, their mode of communication is through text and Facebook and Snapchat and WhatsApp. And it is creating shorter attention spans, because if we think about platforms like Twitter, the emphasis is on brevity, right? You have to be brief in what you communicate. I've heard some people say, don't send me a voice note that's longer than 1 minute. Our attention span and our tolerance for information is a lot less than it used to be. So information overload is one. And you find that as an extension of information overload, media outlets are trying harder and harder to get our attention. So they sensationalize, they blow information out of proportion. There are news outlets that are 24 hours, and they make what seems to be even the smallest event, like a national or international incident, and they prolong providing information. So when they could tell you a story in 5 minutes, they stretch it out over a period of several days to keep you interested and engaged, because they know you want to know the outcome. They are devising more and more strategies, more sensational strategies. And by sensational, I don't mean good. I mean sensational as in overblown strategies to maintain, to grab and to maintain our attention. So that's another element of information overload. And the next issue that kind of stops us from listening to each other is oftentimes when we're in conversation, we are so preoccupied or concerned with what's going on with us that we don't have time for, or we cannot focus on the other person. Even when we see two people in conversation, we tend to be more concerned with our next point. What do we say in response to them? And so we're so busy formulating a response that even when we should be listening, we're not really listening. We're thinking about how to respond. And we see that often in arguments, but even in other forms of communication where high emotions are not involved, listening takes a second tail, a second place to us formulating our ideas, formulating our response to the person. And when we do that, our emphasis is not really on them, it's on us. And so we have a kind of me-centered communication, but that makes sense because everything today seems to be promoting the individual, how you feel, what do you want, what is important to you, as opposed to being more us-centered, the greater good, or thinking about the other person and communicating in a way that focuses on them. Another impediment or barrier to communication would be distractions. What do I mean by distractions, or in what form do distractions come up in communication? What are some of these distractions that we face in trying to have a conversation with other people, trying to get our point across? I deal with it all the time as a professor, trying to get my students' attention. But what are some of the distractions, especially in an online platform?
I probably would say for persons that have families or live with families, or sorry, for persons that have children, and trying to do a class via Zoom, they can be distracted by trying to tell that child, sit down or don't do this, or they may have to make something to eat for them. Like it's a lot of distractions at home.
So you
especially if
have
you're-
family obligations that you try to juggle, and this
Right.
working from home thing is a totally new territory, and how to navigate it. And I'll tell you an experience I had with students in a bit, because as faculty members at UB, we got a lot of training. Like we did online classes, like how to use these platforms, how to integrate media into the classroom, and different strategies. So we had to take an entire course on this. As we made the transition, we were also learning, but students didn't have that, right? But and I'll tell you what that translated to with some of the more interesting experiences I had in our first semester online. But people are distracted. So yeah, you have kids who may be competing for your attention. Your device goes off, we get an alert, someone sends us a message, we want to see what it is. But there are distractions like noise as well. People who live in the house with you. We take for granted, and it's something that I have to remind myself not to do, that if we're working from home, the other person's environment is conducive to working and learning the way we've tried to make ours conducive to working and learning. In my case, that's okay. I don't have kids. I don't have all these different distractions competing for my attention. But in a home where you have several children all sharing a device or all sharing a space, finding a quiet space to minimize distractions becomes a problem, right? I had an experience with one of my students. I was teaching away, and he unmuted his mic to ask a question, and I couldn't hear him. And one of the things we taught in teaching an online class is you don't make assumptions about the students' learning space, and you try not to pressure them too much to be in a particular environment, because we don't know what their home situations are. And so I was kind of, being easygoing, and I said to him, is it possible for you to move away from where you are, because I can barely hear you? There was all this background noise. And he said, oh, miss, I'm at a party. There is no quiet place where I am. And I heard that and I thought, okay, well, carry on. You're gonna have to email me a question. Then you have students who they're at work, and the student says to me, oh, I'm on camera, but excuse me, my manager's gonna be coming in and giving me work to do. So you may see this other person walking in. And when we first made this transition, a whole portion of the semester was spent on just talking to them about minimizing distractions and what it meant to be online. Going to school online allows you to do things like work, and it gives you some flexibility, but it doesn't mean you should be working while in class. That's not what it means. Or you should be at a party while in class. And you would think that these things are just a given, like who would have to spend time discussing it? But in a world where these distractions take precedence, then we can't assume, the people know or they understand the importance of minimizing these distractions. Another barrier to listening is our personal biases. We may not like the person we're talking to, or we may disagree with what they're saying. And oftentimes we tune them out because what they're saying does not align with our own values. And another, or the final barrier I want to talk about is our rate of speech and how that measures up to our rate of thought, or how fast our brain works. How many words do you think we could process a minute or speak a minute? How many words do you think the human brain can produce a minute? What do you think is the average? You want to hazard a guess?
75?
5 words. We speak 5
No,
words a minute.
no, 75.
Oh, 75. Not bad. Not bad. Some people maybe speak slower. We speak somewhere between 120 and 130 words a minute. That's a lot. But that is nothing compared to our brain's capacity to process what we hear. So we speak about 120 to 130. Our brain can actually process 700 words a minute. Filter, sort through 700 words. So imagine what that means. That means that there's a gap between what we're hearing and what we can process. And in that gap lays boredom. That's when we tune people out. When we stop listening because we get bored, and that's when the distractions come in because we've gotten disengaged. We've stopped listening to them because they're not moving at a rate that our brain is moving or our brain would like them to move. So all of these things, distractions, information overload, being overwhelmed with what's going on with us, our personal biases, and that gap between our speech and our brain, or the speaker's speech and our brain. All of these things create barriers to listening. So the question then becomes, what do we do? How do we become better listeners and kind of navigate beyond these barriers? So I'm going to share a short video with you, which talks about being better listeners. It's a really short video, about 6 minutes or so, because again, studies show that it's hard for human beings to listen beyond 5, 6 minutes, right? The information. Because apparently our capacity for information is becoming smaller and smaller. And so you have what's becoming almost these little, almost sound bites, right? More and more we're hearing sound bites, more than actual communication. But let's listen to these strategies. And as he talks, I want you to jot them down because you'll hear them again or be asked to recall them again. And you will need them to complete the exercise at the end of the lesson. So let's go back to the very beginning.
We're going to talk about active listening skills. So let's get into the details. Hey there, I'm Alex Lyon, and I actually have a 1-hour course on effective listening skills for leaders. I will tell you more about that at the end of the video. So listening is so important because good listening is probably the easiest way to connect with other people and build relationships. Active listening is the opposite of passive listening, and you have probably experienced this. The person you're talking to might technically be hearing some of what you're saying, but they are tuned out. They're on autopilot. They're just not mentally engaged with what you're saying. And as the speaker, this can be very dissatisfying, very discouraging when people really aren't paying attention to us. Like, why am I even talking in the first place? But active listening looks, sounds, and feels obvious. Active listening means listening completely. But before anybody does that well, there are 2 secrets, 2 prerequisites to active listening. Number 1, you have to commit. You have to put aside whatever else might be distracting you and make listening a real priority. Good listening is first and foremost a choice that you make every time somebody speaks. Number 2, it takes practice. Like any skill, you have to work at it. The good news is that listening is not mysterious or complicated. So let's talk about 4 qualities of active listening that you can put into practice. First, active listening involves nonverbal communication. And there are 2 sides to this. On the one hand, you're demonstrating that you're engaged and paying attention nonverbally. You put your devices completely away, you make eye contact, your body posture is open and oriented toward the other person. Now, on the other side, you're also noticing the speaker's nonverbal cues. There's an expression, you listen with your eyes. And part of that means you're noticing what's happening with the person visually on their mood or their emotion that they're showing. Do they look nervous, frustrated, annoyed? You can pick up on that by actively observing their nonverbal communication. Second, active listening involves verbal communication. Again, there are 2 sides to this. The most obvious part is asking good questions. Probably the most common pattern that good listeners demonstrate is that they ask a good question and then they let the speaker fully answer it. Like a good mental health therapist will ask thoughtful questions and then stop talking for a while and let the client speak. Honestly, what we're paying for in many cases is just somebody to listen carefully to us. So a good question is a huge part of the listening pie. And the other part of verbal communication is those small utterances that show the other person that we're following them. Like, I hear you. Yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes it's not even full words. It might just be, oh. Those little utterances keep us engaged and show the other person that we're following. Third, active listening involves responding to what somebody just said. So the pattern goes like this. You ask a question, they respond for however long that takes, and at the end of that talking term, you give an informed response to them. So let's say you just ask a person what they've been up to lately. That's your question. And in their talking turn, they tell you that they have been doing diving lately. So you actively listen for a while they're talking. At the end of their talking turn, it's your turn again. And this is where you show that you were actively following along and were interested in what they were saying. And you can do this by reflecting back what you just heard. You might say something like, wow, that sounds like an exciting sport. That's really cool that you're doing that. Or you could ask another follow-up question. I had no idea that you were into diving. How did you first get into that? Of course, you could do a little bit of both, like I just did. You could make an informed, reflective statement and then ask a follow-up question. The key is to respond to what they have just been saying. What you don't want to do is just look at them blankly and not react when they're done talking. And you've probably had somebody do this to you. You tell them about part of your day or something about your life, and they don't react. They just have this stone face. That's not active listening. If you want a gold star for active listening, then you have to respond to what they just said. Fourth, keep the focus on them and let them talk. Now, this one might seem obvious because you're listening, but when you decide to go into that listening mode, just make a decision that this is going to be all about the other person talking and not about you. Resist that temptation to jump in with your own story or to change the subject to your favorite topic. Keep your talking turns and questions concise, and then stick to whatever topic they're interested in. Now, eventually, once they've done plenty of talking, there will usually be an opportunity later in the conversation for you to share your experiences. But my rule of thumb is to dedicate at least the first half of the conversation to pure active listening. So I hope these 4 tips help you listen completely in your next conversation. Question of the day, which one of these tips do you need the most work on? I would love to read what you have to say below in that comment section. And I do have 2 follow-up videos on listening coming soon on comprehensive listening and empathetic listening. And I'll link to those in the description below once they are posted. And I also have a 1-hour course on effective listening.
Okay, so he's talking more about listening in conversation, but how do we apply that to communication on the job? What do we need to do? So what does active listening mean when it comes to business communication? One of the most important listening skills, active listening, involves one, hearing, but in addition to the words, you're also paying attention to the nonverbal communication. So what else is going on around the person to whom we're speaking? And how does that then figure into whatever they're communicating? So you pay attention to the silent messages. Look at facial expressions, posture, body language. All of these things send messages, and in some cases, more messages than the words that people speak. So I'll give you an example. Imagine that you are in a senior position at your job, and you have a sense that something's wrong with an employee who used to be a good performer, but they've changed. Their performance at the job has changed. And so you want to meet with that employee and you ask if there's a problem. They may verbally respond to you and say, no, I don't have a problem. But through active listening, you notice certain things. You notice their hand is folded, arms are folded across their chest. You notice that they're not looking at you, not looking you in the eye, and that their responses are very short. And so you determine through active listening that even though this employee is not being forthright, there is something wrong. Now, you may have to walk a fine line in terms of getting that employee to share, but you at least know there are some action steps required to get to the root of the problem, right? If we look at the earlier example of being in a meeting with a customer, let's say you work in a customer service position, and you are trying to minimize the bad experience that a customer has had. Because remember, in previous classes, we talked about customers who were dissatisfied with service today now taking their complaints to social media, and social media being a tool more and more that can impact our business favorably or negatively. And so you want to mitigate this bad experience that the customer has had in doing business with your organization. You're in a meeting and you want to use active listening strategies to make that customer feel heard, or to make that customer feel like their concerns are important, so that they don't leave that meeting with an even worse feeling about this business, or with even more determination not to do business. So what are some of the practical, so he gave us some practical strategies, but what are some of the things that he did not mention? So he said you want to ask questions, yeah, to find out more information. You want to not interrupt them, let them speak. Is there anything else that you could think of that he did not mention to show that we're really listening to this person with whom we're in this communication act? We're trying to achieve an objective, whatever that objective is. How do we make the person that we're communicating with feel more heard and understood? What are some of the things that we need to do? Or do you think he captured them all? Let me hear first what you got from the video. If you were actively listening, paying attention, what were some of the strategies that he mentioned?
He mentioned,
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead.
you
Okay,
can
so
go.
he mentioned that you have to be committed to listening to what the person is saying.
So that means eliminate distractions. So come to this communication act prepared to listen. That means put aside your biases. If it's someone you don't particularly care for, or a customer that you know to be difficult, you can't come to the communication act thinking, Lord, I don't want to deal with this woman today. I don't know why she doesn't go home or leave this business or find something else. Find another organization to do business with. We can't come to that attitude. And that's easier said than done, right? Because even no matter what field we're in, there are people we would prefer not to have to deal with for whatever reason, but we can't come to the communication exercise or act with that attitude. So be committed to listening. Anything else?
Let them talk, let them express themselves.
Listen.
Yeah, and
And
that's, sorry.
sorry, I'm cutting you off as we talk about listening to people. Sorry, go ahead.
And the reason that that I remember that there are many times you have interactions with customers who are frustrated over a service that they would have gotten, and the minute you interrupt them, you know, there's further contention to the conversation because you're not allowing them to express themselves. You're not allowing them to speak. I remember one incident that I personally had, and the customer said to me, I said, calm down. And what I said that for, because she was—
You saw my eyes open, right, Janet?
Yeah, she was, I mean, and the reason I said calm down, because she was just making a whole bunch of noise. And she was out in the foyer, and I said, calm down very nicely. What I said that for? I mean, that took it to another level. And so, I mean, interrupting somebody, particularly when they're irate, I think that it further ignites them to express themselves even more in a negative manner. So I think listening and not interrupting them is key.
And in situations like that, if you find that a customer is irate or making a scene, sometimes it's better to find a private space if that's possible, because I've had the experience of being in a bank and the customer was upset about funds taken from his account. And listen, I was at the point, and I'm sure other people in the bank were at the point of thinking we need to leave because this is going to be a bad situation, or maybe they need to call the police. And so in that case, it may have been best, and the bank's CSR didn't think to do that. And eventually I left. He was still there carrying on when I left. but take the customer someplace quiet because you don't want their behavior, their anger, whether we believe it's legitimate or not, we don't want it to spill over and make other customers uncomfortable, right? Or make other customers fear for their safety. And that's a real concern today, all right? Good. Anything else that he said that was particularly useful?
In-
He
in-
said that
I
hello?
heard two people. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. He said that it takes practice.
It takes practice because of all the listening barriers we talked about. The me-centered approach, the I'm so overwhelmed and busy and I'm distracted. We're going to have to be so deliberate that we're willing to work on our listening. It's not something that comes easily, right? But it's something that takes practice, and we need to avoid certain language too. And maybe this relates more to personal communication than on the job. But anytime there is disagreement or conflict, and the language gets to you always or you don't ever, the communication is going to break down. Because when we speak in absolutes in that way, right? Then it means that we are exaggerating. So whenever we come to exaggerated language, then the communication is probably not going to go well. Somebody else started to answer at the same time as the last student. Who was that?
That was Natasha. I
Natasha?
say the same thing. It takes practice.
It takes practice. So it's not something that's going to come easy. And there are behaviors that we can use to show that we're listening. So practical things. Look people in the eye, right? And that's especially important in business because people, when your eyes are shifty and you're looking all over the place and not at them, people wonder what you have to hide. So imagine you work in a bank and you're telling the customer something about their account, or you're explaining why money was moved from the account and you're looking left, right, around. They're gonna wonder if you had something to do with moving their money, or they're not gonna trust you. For whatever reason, we want to avoid not looking at the customer directly in the eye, because it suggests that the information that we are saying or relaying to that customer is not true and can't be trusted, and we by extension can't be trusted. And then we want to do things like use positive body language. This is also what he said. You want to do, you nod, you smile. Sometimes you say things like, yes, okay, all right, I understand, but also look at their body language. This is a critical part of active listening because, as I said earlier, sometimes what they don't say is just as important or even more important as the things that they do say. And there's often an incongruence between what they are saying and what their body language is showing. All right, so watch the body language as well, because sometimes if they don't match, you may need to delve deeper to see what's really going on. And then you need to really listen to what is being said. And that seems obvious, right? Because that's the point of any communication. But really listen, not think about what you're going to say next, not study what the person is wearing, or pay attention to irrelevant details about the individual. Really focus on what they're saying and concentrate so that they feel heard, and concentrate also so that when you respond to them, it is an informed response. Or when you ask a question, it is a logical question based on what you've heard. I absolutely hate communicating and then having people say, well, can you tell me? And I'm thinking, I just told you, you were not listening. I need you to listen. And I've said that so many times. I need you to listen. I need you to listen. And people tend to be offended when you say things like you're not listening to me. But the sad reality is oftentimes in communication, we are not really listening to the other person. If it's on the job, we may be thinking about all the other things we have to do. Or if it's in a class, we think about all the things our children need us to do, and the fact that we want mistakes to hurry up, get to the point so we could get out of class. but the things that are pulling at our attention. So we have to be deliberate in listening and don't interrupt, right? This is something that I have to remind myself as well. I think if the average person speaks 125 words a minute, I probably speak about 300. And I'm just going and going and talking and talking and talking. And I find myself interrupting, especially if I agree. You might hear me cut you off and say, yeah, okay, because and eager to share information. So it's something I have to remind myself often. Don't interrupt. And we have this thing in our society where people say not to cut you off while they're cutting you off. And then they go on with their point. Well, what does it mean? What does it communicate when you interrupt someone? What are you saying? You're saying what I have to say is more important than you. What you have to say, more important than you to me. I don't really care about what you're saying. I don't have time to listen to you and your opinion. This isn't a conversation or communication. It's a kind of contest. And I need to get my ideas out so that I can win this contest. And so interrupting sends some negative messages that we want to avoid. So make sure you don't interrupt. Just let the person speak. And sometimes that's going on for 5 minutes where they're venting and blowing off steam. And we feel uncomfortable, but we let the person continue, right? Until they feel heard. And you'll be surprised. Sometimes when we just sit there and we listen and the customer vents or the person vents, eventually they stop, they look at us and they feel a little bit silly because as they are emotional and irate, we're calmly looking at them. And then we've all had that, are you finished? That question that kind of makes the customer feel uncomfortable with their display, right? And so sometimes us maintaining our calm and letting them finish can bring calm to the situation and can help them to see the need for them to also calm down, right? And then of course there is like that situation that Janice shared, that unreasonable customer who just isn't prepared to listen. And when you say things like calm down or just relax, they feel even more minimized, right? So we have to make allowances for people like that as well. And understand that not every communication act is going to go the way we want it to go. But the key in a difficult situation, especially on the job, is that we are not the ones to escalate the situation and make it worse. We are not the ones to take bad communication up a notch because they're screaming at us, we're screaming back at them. No, that's not the way we want this communication to go. All right, and then ask questions. Wait for pauses in the communication, ask questions, and this is what we call reflecting, a kind of reflective listening. So I want you to write that down, reflective listening. So active listening involves hearing, but paying attention to what else is going on around the speaker. And reflective listening involves hearing, taking it in, but being able to respond in a thoughtful way, asking questions because we were actually listening. And that may mean repeating what someone has said. So in that meeting with that customer, you say, okay, so let me make sure I understand exactly what happened. And you relate to them what they said to you. Or let me make sure I understand what it is you would like for us to do. And you relate the essence of their conversation with you, just to show them I was listening to you, I actually heard you, and I'm now in a position to take steps to resolve whatever your issue is. But you're right, the first person that said we have to commit to listening, it does require commitment, it requires time, it requires practice, it requires effort. It's not something that comes easily or even quickly, but it will take some time to improve our listening skills. But it's important because not only does it improve the quality of our relationships and our communication level, but it can help our business if we are a small business owner, or if we work in a larger organization, it can help the reputation of our business or the reputation of our organization and our relationships with customers and our colleagues. And it minimizes the potential for mishaps and misunderstandings, for things to go wrong, right? All right, so as usual, I said a mouthful. We talked about the summary writing strategies. So when you're given a written piece of communication, what do? How do you scan and look for subheadings and determine what's important from what is not important or non-essential? And then you make notes and go from those notes. When you're in conversation, the kinds of behaviors that you use to show that you're actually listening to the person that you're talking to, the nodding and the not interrupting, and asking intelligent questions, allowing for a kind of dialogue between you and the person that you're talking to, so you don't monopolize the conversation and you let them feel heard. The exercise that I want us to do will blend listening and writing strategies. And so we're going to complete a summary writing exercise, but it's going to be based on you listening to me. We're not having a conversation, but if you listen well and absorb the information, you will need to listen well and absorb the information. You'll need to follow some of the same strategies that we're talking about. So I want you to clear your mind. If possible, go someplace where distractions are minimized, so that you can really take in what you're hearing. And then as you listen, think about how the points I'm relaying are related to each other. So try to find connections between the information I'm sharing. Try to determine what's the main idea of this passage that I'm reading. What are the subpoints? So divide main points from subpoints, divide what is essential from what is not essential. I'm going to read 2 passages to you, but I'm going to read each passage 3 times. And so when I read the first passage, I want you to just listen. And that is going to help you to get that overall sense of what I'm reading. Then when I read the passage for a second time, that is when you begin to take notes. So in the second reading, you take notes. So what notes should you be writing down? Those main points we talked about earlier. But a key strategy in summary writing is to use your own language. Why do you think there's so much emphasis on using your own language as you are summarizing a longer piece of communication? Why is it a good strategy to use your own language?
I think to get a better understanding
That's
of
it.
what's being said.
That's it. It's a critical listening and critical reading strategy. In order for you to use your language, it means you really have to understand what you heard, right? But remember, in using your own language, you don't misrepresent what you heard. You don't change the ideas. And so first reading, just listen. Second reading, take notes in your own language. In the third reading, that's when you review the notes that you took and you're checking for accuracy. That's where you make sure nothing is misrepresented. Did I leave anything out? Did I misrepresent any ideas? That's your opportunity to correct any information that you got wrong. Once you've done that, then you can write your summary, but you write the summary from the notes that you took. And that's going to be important because next week when you write your summary for a grade, or in the coming weeks when you write your summary for a grade, you're going to be summarizing something written. And the temptation will be to use the language of the text. But really, when you do that in summary writing at an academic level, you're marked down for borrowing too much from the original. So you want to use your own language as much as possible. And when you've made your notes, write your summary based on the notes that you've taken. And before you consider your summary complete, you want to go back to the rudimentary things we learned about communication in the first week or 2 of the class. Edit for flow. You want to make sure it reads easily, that there are no errors in grammar, and correctness is on point. We're going to come back to our grammar tutorials. We did the comma. We're going to look at other punctuation marks. We haven't abandoned our little focus on writing tutorials, but you want to, as far as possible, make sure that what you produce flows and is free of any grammar or mechanical errors. Just a note about summary writing in general, it is a more formal form of communication. It is not informal. So what does that mean? That summary writing is a formal form of communication or formal form of writing. Informal writing allows you to be more personal. So you could do things like address the audience. You could do things like express personal opinions. Your tone can be more conversational. So you want to think of informal communication as more conversational, talking with a friend about something casual. More formal writing requires that your tone is more professional. Your style is more professional. No personal experiences in the summary. You don't make judgments about what was communicated. You don't express personal opinions. Your summary should convey only the need to know essential information. No context or commentary from you. You also, because it's formal, you don't use colloquialisms. You want to write using standard English as you're presenting just the facts. All right, so keep that in mind that this is a more formal form of communication. As it is generally everything that we will write in this class, every business communication activity I ask you to complete will be more formal as opposed to informal. All right, so before I begin reading, I want to give you the opportunity to ask any questions. Do you want me to clarify what we're about to do for the next 45 minutes or so? We're gonna spend some time on this exercise. Do I need to clarify anything?
Yes, ma'am. So once we've heard the two paragraphs, what are we
Two
doing with
passages.
the two passages? What are we doing with those passages?
You are writing a summary based on what you've heard.
Okay, all right.
And
cool.
then I'm not grading this, but you're gonna share your summary with me and I'll give you feedback in preparation for when I am grading the exercise.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, okay. That's what we're gonna do.
Okay.
All right, and then once we've done that, then I need to talk to you about the bad news communication assignment that you're gonna have to do. All right, so if you look at your syllabus, actually, let's look at the syllabus. Let me pull that up. It's always a good idea for us to look at where we are on the syllabus and see where we are going. Oh, and I also need to put people into groups for that last assignment, the video assignment. So you can begin working on that.
Aren't
Let
we
me
in
do
groups
that.
already?
Not everyone, remember some people were
Oh, some
absent.
people. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. All
Let
right.
me find the syllabus. I have 1,000,001 documents. Let me do a search. All right. So we are in week 4. So we've been at this for about a month. Your first graded assignment, the communicating bad news. Let me try to make this bigger. It's because it's a PDF, it's not working. My control and plus is not working. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So we are in week 4. Your first assignment, which is this, is going to be due, it says October 6th, but remember, I'm going to give you some leeway. So you don't have to turn this in to me until October 10th at 11:59 p.m. When I share the assignment with you, you'll see that you have some submission guidelines to follow. So tonight we've been talking about note-taking and summary writing, body language. Last week we talked a little bit about handling difficult customers. So we've been condensing information and getting to the syllabus. And you have some chapter readings, so make sure you're following along with them. Last week, we worked from chapter 3, negative news and crisis communication. For those of you who are not here during that first week, When I talked about second week, sorry, when I talked about group presentations, I'm referring to these assignments at the bottom of the this PDF, right? These 5 assignments. All right, so because I knew I was going to forget, I wrote down who was in groups and who was not. So let me check the dates on these documents. All right, 9/29. Yeah, there we go. All right, so in group 1, we have Denise and Adrika. In group 2, we have Janice and Natasha. In group 3, we have Bernique and Felicia. But there are 5 assignments. And so we need 2 other groups. I want you to raise your hand if you are not assigned to a group. Helga, I know you're not. Jules, you are not. Raise your hand, please.
I was in a group. I was in a group the last time. Group 2.
No, not for that assignment. You mean when I put you into breakout rooms?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is for the assignment on your syllabus, the video presentations you have to do at the end of the semester.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we did this, I think we divided students into groups in week 2. So raise your hand for me. If you don't know how to raise your hand, no pressure. Look for the more on your device. Click that and you should see hand up. You can raise your hand and lower your hand. Until you find it, just speak out. So Jules, Helga, who else is not in the group? Okay, Helga, I see your hand up. Jules, who else is not in the group? All right, so guess what? You two, Tanishka is not in the group. Tanishka Cobra. Felicia. Felicia is also not in the group.
Yes, I am in a
Oh,
group.
yes, you are in a group with Bernique.
Right.
So Tanishka. Helga. Helga Cummings and Jules. All right, so it means that because I think we lost, I don't know if we lost a student. But we have only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 9 students who come to class off and on 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. All right, so listen, please. Helga and Jules, you are in group 5. Helga and Jules, you are in group 5. Tanishka, you are in group 4. I'm gonna put you in group 4 for now, Tanishka. I need to reach out to some students who are registered but haven't been coming to class to find out whether they have withdrawn from the course. If that is the case, you will not be able to work by yourself. I will ask you to join one of the existing groups, Tanishka. Okay, so give me until next week. Helga and Jules, you are in group 5. Now, which assignment are you working on? So this is where we go back to the syllabus. And let me share the screen with you again. So this is assignment 4 for the benefit of Tanishka for now. You've resigned from your job. Your manager calls a meeting with you to persuade you to reconsider. And Jules and Helga, this is your assignment 5. Now, we discussed the logistics of this assignment. And I mentioned that there is the opportunity for you to go to Biff's office on Saturdays if you want a space where you and your partner can meet to discuss this assignment. You could go to Biff's office on Saturdays from 9 to 1, or you two can work out the logistics of how this meeting will go, but you have to actually produce a video that acts out the scenario you've been assigned. Okay? Just for clarity, Helga and Jules and Tanishka. Okay? Are you clear on what you're doing? You can ask me questions now, or you may email me if you want, and I can respond to questions then. It's totally up to you. And you have guidelines
this is,
video at the top. How long should it be? What should the video demonstrate? Somebody had a question?
no, you're answering it now.
Yeah, so it's at the top. Okay. All right, so that's what you're doing. And this assignment is worth, let's see, 15% of your grade. Okay. And they don't start, the videos do not start until week 10, so November 10th. And it is October 6th now, so you have about 6 weeks to work on this assignment. You and your partner exchange numbers, and you two work out the logistics of the assignment. And of course, you're going to send the video to me using whatever platform you choose, whether it's you use your cell phone to create the video. I'm not expecting anything really technical where you have like a cameraman and all that, no. But you create the video, send it to me, and I'm going to share it with the class, and we're gonna offer feedback. And of course, your group will get a grade. Okay? All right, so now the passages that I'm going to read to you. Let me close some of these windows on my computer. Okay, so are you ready? I'm going to read each of these passages 3 times. The first one is a short passage. I want you to listen to the instructions. What I'm going to read to you is about 120 words long. You will summarize it in 60 words. So you will cut this passage in half. It is about 120 words long. You will summarize it in 60 words. The name of the passage is Conference Call Etiquette. First reading. Preparation for a conference call begins long before you connect with the other party. Start by checking your technical setup and test your mic, speakers, and video camera before you begin the call. This decreases the likelihood that any technical issues will interrupt the call. Next, ensure that your call is taking place in an area that avoids picking up any distracting sounds. You don't want background noise to be picked up on the receiving end of your call. Once you are on the call, be sure to pay close attention to those you are communicating with. Before you begin to speak, always make sure that the other people on the line have concluded their thoughts. Okay, so reading 2, and I'm going to go a little bit slower. Preparation for a conference call begins long before you connect with the other party. Start by checking your technical setup and test your mic, speakers, and video camera before you begin the call. This decreases the likelihood that any technical issues will interrupt the call. Next, ensure that your call is taking place in an area that avoids picking up any distracting sounds. You don't want background noise to be picked up on the receiving end of your call. Once you are on the call, be sure to pay close attention to those you are communicating with. Before you begin to speak, always make sure that the other people on the line have concluded their thoughts. I'm going to give you some time to make notes before I read it for the last time. Okay, so final reading. Preparation for a conference call begins long before you connect with the other party. Start by checking your technical setup and test your mic, speakers, and video camera before you begin the call. This decreases the likelihood that any technical issues will interrupt the call. Next, ensure that your call is taking place in an area that avoids picking up any distracting sounds. You don't want background noise to be picked up on the receiving end of your call. Once you are on the call, be sure to pay close attention to those you are communicating with. Before you begin to speak, always make sure that the other people on the line have concluded their thoughts. So that's the easy one. 60 words should be your final summary.
Are you gonna read the other one or do this now?
I'm going to read the other one.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. So the second passage is 272 words long. You will summarize it in 150 words. 272 words long. You will summarize it in 150 words. And the title of the passage is Organizing Your Office Space to Improve Communication. Organizing your office space to improve communication. So just listen to the first reading. If you're working within a physical office, one of the best steps you can take to improve workplace communication is to evaluate the way it is designed. In this day and age, there are countless options for office setup and design. Traditionally, offices were designed for privacy and often were broken up with cubicles and partitions, making the work environment more private and secluded. In more recent years, we have seen a shift in organizations adopting a more open concept design. An open floor plan eliminates nearly all physical barriers, and some argue that it encourages an increase in employee communication and collaboration. But in recent years, research has not supported the claims that open floor plans increase efficiency and communication or lower working costs. Truthfully, it comes down to your specific organization and workplace preferences. Does the work you do require silence? Are opportunities for collaboration at a minimum intentionally? If so, an open workspace is not likely going to help your people thrive. On the other end of the spectrum, if you are in constant communication with your team, eliminating physical barriers is probably in your best interest. If you're unsure about what avenue to take, go right to the source and take an employee poll. Ask your workforce what they want. Asking your workforce what they want is the only foolproof way to get it right. Either way, employees can often take pride in having a space that is their own. So no matter the layout of your office, be sure to allow for employees to customize it as they wish. That is the key to ensuring their personal space is a good fit. All right, so slower reading the second time, you should be taking notes. If you're working within a physical office, one of the best steps you can take to improve workplace communication is to evaluate the way it is designed. In this day and age, there are countless options for office setup and design. Traditionally, offices were designed for privacy and often were broken up with cubicles and partitions, making the work environment more private and secluded. In more recent years, we have seen a shift in organizations adopting a more open concept design. An open floor plan eliminates nearly all physical barriers, and some argue that it encourages an increase in employee communication and collaboration. But in recent years, research has not supported the claims that open floor plans increase efficiency and communication or lower working costs. Truthfully, it comes down to your specific organization and workplace preferences. Does the work you do require silence? Are opportunities for collaboration at a minimum intentionally? If so, an open workspace is not likely going to help your people thrive. On the other end of the spectrum, if you are in constant communication with your team, eliminating physical barriers is probably in your best interest. If you're unsure about what avenue to take, go right to the source and take an employee poll. Asking your workforce what they want is the only foolproof way to get it right. Either way, employees often take pride in having a workspace that is their own. So no matter the layout of your office, be sure to allow for employees to customize it as they wish. That is the key to ensuring that personal space is a good fit. Okay, so final reading, or do you want more time to take your notes? Good?
Can you repeat the topic again for the second one?
Organizing your office space to improve communication.
Thanks.
Okay. So if you're working within a physical office, one of the best steps you can take to improve workplace communication is to evaluate the way it is designed. In this day and age, there are countless options for office setup and design. Traditionally, offices were designed for privacy and often were broken up with cubicles and partitions, making the work environment more private and secluded. In more recent years, we have seen a shift in organizations adopting a more open concept design. An open floor plan eliminates nearly all physical barriers, and some argue that it encourages an increase in employee communication and collaboration. But in recent years, research has not supported the claims that open floor plans increase efficiency and communication or lower working costs. Truthfully, it comes down to your specific organization and workplace preferences. Does the work you do require silence? Are opportunities for collaboration at a minimum intentionally? If so, an open workspace is not likely going to help your people thrive. On the other end of the spectrum, if you are in constant communication with your team, eliminating physical barriers is probably in your best interest. If you're unsure about what avenue to take, go right to the source and take an employee poll. Asking your workforce what they want is the only foolproof way to get it right. Either way, employees often take pride in having a space that is their own. So no matter the layout of your office, be sure to allow for employees to customize it as they wish. That is the key to ensuring that personal space is a good fit. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you have about 30 minutes to produce the two summaries. The first one should be 60 words long, and the second 150 words. Let's see what you're able to do to condense these two passages. Okay. I'm going to turn off my camera, but I'm here. You can ask me any questions that you may need to. How are you coming along? Do you need more time? Are you in a position where
Just
you're
2
able to
minutes,
share? Sorry?
2 minutes. I
You
could
need
share the
about 2
first one,
minutes?
but I need 2 minutes to finish the second one.
Sure. Jules, I see your hand is up.
No, sorry, I was supposed to take that down.
Okay, all right. I'll give you the additional 2 minutes, no problem.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm eager to hear what you were able to come up with. It's difficult to concentrate on long pieces of information. But let's see what you got from each passage, how you were able to condense them, and how close to the word limit did you get. Now, one of the rules of summary writing is that if you were about 10 words below the limit, that's allowed. If you were 10 words over the limit, that's allowed. Either of those would not impact your grade if this is, for instance, a graded assignment. But anytime you are substantially below or above the word limit, then it begins to impact your grade for the summary. All right, so 40 words would probably mean that you're leaving key information out. 80 words would mean you have included information that can be taken out. And so you want to stick as close to the word limit as possible. Who would like to volunteer their response for number 1, the easy passage?
Me.
Felicia?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Felicia.
Okay, I can start.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, when you're preparing for a conference call, here are some pointers you should consider before you start the meeting. Make sure you test your technical setup, example, speakers, and so forth. Go to a noiseless or silent place to avoid distractions. Make sure you pay close attention to the person communicating so you can get a clear overview of what is being said. Once you grasp the 3 pointers that was given, your conference call should go smoothly. That's it.
How many words is that, Felicia? A lot. A lot. Okay, so you got the main points, but there are some suggestions we can offer to cut your summary down and get even closer to the 60-word limit. So what suggestions would we offer for Felicia?
I think she used make sure a couple of times there. She probably could have cut 1 or 2 of those out.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think what Jules is saying is the communication didn't have to be structured as though you were addressing an audience directly. When you do this, be sure to do what you can do to cut down the number of words is you begin simply when preparing for a conference call, make sure, and then you just start with your list, the list of things you need to do.
Okay.
And then that commentary at the end where you say, if you do these things, your conference call should go smoothly. What you're doing is repeating unnecessary information, right? A sentence that kind of summarizes and brings it all together is useful, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that wordy. But not a bad effort, Felicia. You got the main point, so that was good. Anybody came closer to the 60 words?
I can
I
try.
Okay. Is that 2 people who answered me or 1 person?
That's 2 persons.
Oh, okay, because I heard a lot of feedback just now. Okay, so Edrika is saying she could try.
Yes.
All
I'll
right,
attempt.
Edrika, go ahead.
Okay. Please find below points on beginning the conference call. Always ensure that your mic is working, internet is functional, and your laptop is charged. This avoids any disruption on your call. Be sure to have your conference call in a quiet area with no distractions. Ensure that you are listening to the persons on the other end of the call to get a better understanding of what they're saying. This ensures effective communication and feedback. And that's all I have.
Okay, all right, good. Same thing, you're probably well over 60 as well.
58.
58 words, really? Okay,
Okay.
and you counted all the words because I've heard students say, well, I didn't think you were supposed to count for and the and all
No,
these.
I counted all the words.
Okay, good. All right, so you came pretty close, good. So I may be wrong in saying that the first student, who was the first student, Edrika?
No,
Or
that was
that was
Felicia.
Edrika just now. Felicia, I may
Yeah,
be
it was
wrong in saying,
It was 50-something words.
Okay,
think-
Felicia, good. All right, good. Anybody else?
I can read mine.
Okay, so is that, let me see who that is.
That's
Helga.
Helga. I tried to condense everything. So I
Mhm.
said, preparing and conducting a conference call 101. First, check all devices such as microphones, speakers, and video cameras to ensure your technical setup is working. Second, eliminate distraction sounds. Be sure no noise is picking up in the background. Third, pay attention to your audience. Once the call is completed, be sure what was said was, sorry, once the call is completed, be sure what was communicated was understood by your audience.
Okay,
So
all
it
right.
went 61 words because
Okay,
I
very
put
good.
audience to the end.
Very good. And so what is also good about Helga's summary is the way she set it up would make the points easier to remember. So we have this kind of list. I imagine that you began with that first line and then a colon and then the list afterward. But even if you did that, you still use transitions. First do this, then do this, and lastly or next do this. So that's good. Okay, so excellent responses from all of you. That was the easy passage. And given the strategies offered and the way this was set up, the information should be easy to remember. So when preparing for a conference call, we need to do several things. When preparing for a conference call, and I'm not saying that that first line is a part of the summary, but when preparing for a conference call, we need to check to make sure our technical setup is working. Speakers, video camera, microphone. We need to make sure that the area in which we are speaking is quiet to minimize distractions. And we also need to pay close attention to our audience. Always let them finish and conclude before we start speaking. I think that was a final point that Helga didn't mention. All right, good. Anybody else before we move on to number 2, the longer message?
A quick point. So would you have to include that like what I wrote here, right? I have
Mhm.
let me read Max.
Okay.
When preparing for a conference call, one must ensure that all visual and audio equipment are in fine working order long before the date of the call. You must guarantee that your environment will not serve as a distraction to participants. Prior to ending the call, you should make certain that all participants have made their thoughts known and clear. And what I was saying is, should I have included the actual audio visual instead of saying audio visual? Should I have said mic video?
By camera speakers.
Yeah.
You didn't necessarily have to do that, but let me ask you, how long is your summary? Because when you, including those specific items, the names of those specific items would depend on your word count.
62,
you-
yeah, because I had to kind of delete a few things. It
You
was like
started
62.
deleting after you
Yeah.
realized and you wanted it to be closer. So they are elaborations and technically we could leave them out. But if you have room, when you say make sure your technical equipment, people may be wondering, well, what do you mean, right? And that may seem basic, but if you have room to include the examples, speakers, video camera, microphone, or call them by name, then you can. If not, then audio, visual, and sound equipment is fine. And we can hope that anybody who's about to attend a conference call knows exactly what the equipment refers to, right? But good, that's very good, Jules, yes. That conveys the main points of the summary. The second passage is longer, and it was a lot more information to condense. So who wants to attempt number 2?
I'll attempt number 2.
Okay, let me see who's answering me. Helga.
Yes.
Okay, Helga.
Okay. Organizing office spaces to improve communication. Whenever you are working in a physical office space, communication is one of the key factors of efficiency. You must first evaluate the way the office is designed. Most offices traditionally are designed with cubicles to ensure privacy, but as of late,
Can you
open
start on
floor.
a little bit for us, Helga?
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
can
can
you
start all
start?
over.
Because I'm trying to,
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to organize your summary in my mind. So can you start again?
Yes. Organizing office spaces to improve communication. Whenever you are working in a physical office space, communication is one of the key factors of efficiency. You must first evaluate the way the office is designed. Most offices traditionally are designed with cubicles to ensure privacy, but as of late, more persons are switching to open floor plans. They have become more popular in recent years. Some feel like this approach will increase communication, even though there has not been any research to confirm. One must keep in mind that if their job requires silence, an open floor will not work. However, for those that are in constant communication, turn the page, eliminating barriers is the way to go. First, take an employee poll to ensure that good to ensure personal space is a good fit. Once the poll is completed, allow the employees to customize their office spaces. And that's what I have.
Okay, excellent. All right, good. What's good about that is it flows and it sounds as though you've asserted your voice, right? And that's a term that teachers use a lot and students are like, what does that mean? It means that I can hear some originality and flow that comes from your own ideas in the piece. So that's good. Anyone else? Anyone else? There were some sentences that were repeated though, that didn't necessarily have to be. Who wants to take another stab at it?
I guess I could go.
Okay, Jules.
All right. Sometimes we spend more time in our workspace environment than we do with our friends and family. Therefore, whenever possible, make sure our workspace is as comfortable as possible. Traditionally, workspaces were more secluded with cubicles and partitions segregating employees. As we have moved into a new age, open floor planning has become the new craze, with the thought that this concept boosts employee productivity and communication. Recent research has found that this may not be accurate. As a result of all of these contrasting beliefs, it would serve an organization well to carry out their own workplace studies to determine which model suits their employees. There are some employees who work best in their own private workstations, and there are employees who prefer open floor planning to allow for free communication with their colleagues. And I deleted everything after that.
Okay. What feedback would we offer to Jules on his summary? It's not a bad attempt, but you've done something that we want to avoid when summarizing somebody else's ideas. Any suggestions? You've added some information that's not in the text or that the text does not convey. What am I talking about?
The first line.
The first line, the first line, and then also there's some issues with interpreting the way ideas are expressed in the text. So the whole notion of spending time with family as opposed to spending time in the office, or how much time we spend in the office, is not included, right? And so we begin our summary by saying one good way to improve workplace communication is to think about design. Very simple, all right? And then we talk about what design was in the past. In the past, we don't even need that sentence. There was a sentence following that that says we have so many options to choose from when thinking about office design. All of that is extra information. We want to get to the meat of it. So we say in the past, offices were designed with cubicles and partitions to ensure employee privacy. But today, organizations are embracing an open floor plan, which encourages and increases collaboration between employees. And then we get into what the research shows. So research has shown that open floor plans can increase efficiency, but it depends on the nature of your organization or the work that you do, something like that. So if you require silence, or if you require a quiet space, that is another way to say it, then an open floor plan would not work. But if your employees need to collaborate and work together, then an open floor plan may work for your organization. If you are unsure, take an employee poll, get their opinion, and that will ensure you adopt the appropriate office design to meet their needs. No matter the design you choose, allow employees to customize their space so they will feel like, or so they will feel most comfortable in it. Something like that conveys exactly what is in the passage without us adding extra ideas or adding extraneous thoughts, right? Or our own opinions. All right, good. So you did well on those two assignments. It's hard to listen to someone, as I said, and take down, or to listen to a passage being read and take down the main points, but you did well on that. Okay, so we usually wrap up or try to wrap up close to 8:30. Before we go though, I need to take attendance and I want to discuss what your assignment for next week, sorry, was Sunday of this week will be. So I'm going to share that on screen with you. Close this. Thank you to those who volunteered their responses. Let me pull up the document and make sure everyone understands what they're doing for their first graded assignment. So this is the assignment that I'm going to email to each of you after class tonight. And it is a bad news, communicating bad news assignment like we worked on last week. I forget the scenarios at this point, but I remember us talking about how to deliver bad news in a way that is tactful and that does not make the employees feel offended or undervalued. And I think I gave you a few scenarios where you communicated, you had the wedding, I remember now, you had the wedding, and then what was the first scenario? The wedding was number 2. What was the first scenario? But we practiced on, sorry?
Sorry, I gonna say, I think one was where you had a coworker that was always correcting you, I think, in
We did that in lessons, but I remember I put you in breakout groups and asked you to write letters. And one was to write the letter to the customer of the wedding and event planning company whose wedding would have to be moved and it would cost her $500 more. So how do you communicate that bad news to the client? So we did some practice with this last week in preparation for this assignment tonight. So the goal of this assignment is to reinforce what we talked about last week, how to deliver bad news. How do you appraise performance and then provide instructions and some motivation for improvement, right? So your assignment is, as the general manager of a local chain of grocery stores, your average performing employee is asked for an increase in rank and salary. Write a 1-page, single-spaced, 300 to 350 word letter, tactfully denying his or her request, but give the employee suggestions and encouragement that could help him or her attain the goal in 1 year. Now, I've said this doesn't have to be presented on letterhead because I'm thinking about what would make it easy for you. I wouldn't want you to have to design letterhead, but it does need to be appropriately addressed based on the format I shared with you last week. And it should be submitted to this email address. I know I've emailed you from a Gmail account before, but please use this Hotmail account. by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday. All right, and of course it has to be typed. I'd really prefer no one write and then scan an assignment to me. Okay, so type and submit by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, October 10th, and this assignment is worth 5% of your grade. I could take any questions or requests for clarification on this assignment. I hope you took good notes last week. And a lot of the information that we covered, for those of you who may not have been able to take notes, is available in chapter 3 of your course text. Any questions? No questions? All right, so I'm assuming that we are in a good space for this assignment, and I look forward to your responses on Sunday. Let me take attendance before we end the lesson. Natasha? Praneek Bain? Tanishka? Helga?
Present.
Is Tanishka still here? Yep. Mikhail Nabi? Edrika, are you still here?
I'm here.
Jules?
Right here, present.
Felicia?
Present.
Janice?
Present.
Denara Strawn? Helena Stirrup? Denise Thompson?
I'm here.
Okay, great. So those are the 4 students I want to reach out to. Well, not so much Praneek. Praneek is usually in class, but those 3 students to find out if they're still enrolled. And depending on their response, Tanishka, we're going to decide what to do about your group assignment. All right, thank you so much for your attention. Have a good evening. I'm going to end the meeting unless you have questions for me.
Good evening. Good evening.